guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutritional advice and analysis. Vitamin D, I know I've covered this many times, but I wanted to come back to vitamin D because of, we're getting into September now. We're in September, getting into the point where in the United Kingdom where the sun is starting to get much weaker, and I've tried to do vitamin D videos every time this time of year, because I want to remind people about how important it is to take a vitamin D supplement throughout the winter if you live at high latitudes. I'm going to give, so this is really a reminder for those people that already take and already convinced that vitamin D is a good idea to take a supplement during the winter, and it's also perhaps some new information for those people that haven't come across my videos before. They can obviously look back at the old videos, and hopefully the information in here will be useful to them, so that they can decide whether they want to take a vitamin D supplement through the winter as well. Vitamin D, the first thing to say about vitamin D is it is not really a vitamin. It's called a vitamin, but really it's a hormone. It's a steroid hormone. It has a very similar structure to testosterone, to estrogen, to progesterone, and that's because it is produced from cholesterol. Cholesterol is like the precursor molecule for the steroid hormones. Vitamin D is actually produced in our skin from cholesterol, and for that it requires the action of ultraviolet light. So if we go outside and we expose our skin to ultraviolet light, we are able to synthesize all the vitamin D that we require. And studies have looked at the amount of vitamin D that can be synthesized in quite strong sunlight, and there are some studies that show that many thousands of IU of vitamin D are manufactured in our skin every day if we expose ourselves to sunlight. And this is where the problem starts, because we don't all have sunlight all year round that is strong enough to cause vitamin D production. Those people that live at high latitudes, such as those people living in the United Kingdom, during the winter months and certainly the autumn months, the sun loses its strength, and that means that the vitamin D production in our skin decreases. So we go possibly 6 months of the year without having this ability to produce cutaneous vitamin D, and that means we have to rely on dietary sources, because vitamin D is also available in the diet. Now, the problem with getting adequate vitamin D through the diet is that the dietary sources of vitamin D are quite limited, and the foods that vitamin D is present in are not the sort of foods that we eat in high amounts. So, for example, fish oils contain vitamin D, but we don't really eat enough fish to get enough vitamin D to allow us to maintain optimal levels from summer through the winter and through to spring. So this is a problem, and research really has changed direction in the last maybe 20 years. Originally, vitamin D was seen as a compound that was required for calcium metabolism, and it prevented a disease called rickets in children, and it prevented a disease called osteomalacia in adults. Now, the recommendations for consuming vitamin D were based on preventing those diseases. So the amount of vitamin D that was given to children who had to prevent them having rickets, it was actually given as cod liver oil. That amount was actually the recommended amount of vitamin D, and it stayed like that for many decades. The situation changed when vitamin D was found to be a very diverse compound in the body. It has many different effects on cell regulation. It doesn't just affect calcium metabolism, it affects all types of cellular regulation. And when it was discovered, for example, that low levels of vitamin D are associated with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, various forms of cancer, it was seen that this vitamin D is really a regulatory hormone in the body, and the amount that's required to prevent rickets or osteomalacia is much lower than the amount that's required to regulate cellular metabolism as a whole. So science has now shown through its experimentation that much higher levels of vitamin D are required than were previously thought. And this is not a problem for those people that live in sunny countries, because they can get adequate vitamin D from the sunlight on their skin. They don't even need a dietary source, and therefore they don't need to worry about the amount of vitamin D that's in their diets, and they certainly don't need vitamin D supplements. However, those people that live at high latitudes, particularly if you have dark skin, because if you have dark skin, you need a stronger sunlight to be able to produce the vitamin D in your skin. Those people with dark skin particularly, but all people that live at high latitudes, they can become vitamin D insufficient or deficient in the winter if they don't have a dietary source of vitamin D. And really the dietary sources are limited, so this means taking supplements. And even the research scientists are very reluctant to recommend taking supplements. Many of them in the vitamin D research field recommend that you take a vitamin D supplement during the winter to prevent your levels of your biologically active form of vitamin D, which is called 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D, dropping below a particular threshold. There are two thresholds. One would cause what we call insufficiency symptoms, which would be they would possibly lead to, in the long term, to an increased risk of cancer or an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Then they wouldn't cause short-term acute effects, but over the long term, if you continue to have very low levels of vitamin D below the insufficiency threshold, you would actually run the risk of increasing your risk of diseases. If you get an actual deficiency, then you fall into a more critical category where you can actually get quite severe clinical symptoms, and the risk of getting many of these diseases goes up much to a much higher level. It's very difficult to give a recommendation of the plasma levels of vitamin D that you need to maintain, because everybody's different, and it's not particularly well known what these levels are. A level of about 40 nanograms per mil, which is 100 millimoles per litre, is the threshold where you have probably optimal levels of this 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D in your plasma. Those are levels of 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D, which is the active metabolite of the vitamin D that is taken as that's the way that that the vitamin D is measured in your plasma. So if you have levels above 40 nanograms per mil, which is equivalent to 100 millimoles per litre, that is seen as an optimal level of an optimal level of vitamin D status. It's not actually measuring vitamin D, it's measuring this compound called 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D. Now that's not much help to most people, because most people don't get their vitamin D levels checked, although you could go to a private doctor. I doubt an NHS doctor would test your levels unless there was a specific medical reason why you required it, but certainly a private doctor would be able to get a test done for vitamin D levels if you were interested in getting and finding out what your 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D levels were. If that's the case, you want to ask them to test your 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D levels, and I would do it during the winter and during the summer to see how they differ and how they go up or go down, and then you can base the amount of supplements vitamin D you would take in a supplement based on those levels. If you want the shotgun approach to maintaining your vitamin D levels throughout the winter, I will give you a rough guide as to how you can do that. During the summer, I would recommend that you go out into the sun as often as you can so that you don't burn, but you need to spend time in the sun, and you need to get your skin exposed to the sun, which means avoiding very strong sun creams, which may be damaging to your skin and your health anyway. But you need to get sun on your skin. As the sun starts to get less strong at about this time of year, so we're talking about moving into September. Also, it's getting a little bit colder, so you tend to spend less time outside. This is the time that you really need to start taking a dietary supplement. For an average sized person, let's say 65 to 75 kilograms in weight, the recommendation is about 2,000 IU of vitamin D, and I would suggest you take the vitamin D3 form because it appears to be, firstly, less readily metabolized, so your plasma levels will stay higher. And because most of the studies have used vitamin D3, that the information is therefore directly transferable. If you take vitamin D2, which is also called ergocalciferol, that's the type of vitamin D that comes from plants. It's not quite so strong. It doesn't maintain its ability to have effects in the body quite so long, and so you might need to increase the dose slightly. So a 2000 IU dose of vitamin D3, which is called cholecalciferol, might equate to a 2500 IU dose of vitamin D2, which is ergocalciferol. So you need to check which one. If you haven't bought a supplement and you go and buy one, then I would just stick with vitamin D3. It's the form that most of the studies have used. About 2000 IU throughout the period where the sun is not available, so that's September, October, November, December, January, February, probably March, and maybe even April as well if you live in the United Kingdom. You'd have to adjust that for where you live in the world. I can't give a recommendation for every single country. But if you look at the latitude of the United Kingdom, if you live at a similar latitude, then you'll probably have a similar kind of requirement for vitamin D. If you live closer to the equator, you can probably, the sun may well be strong enough. For example, in Spain, the sun may well be strong enough in September and maybe April and even March, so that you don't need a supplement. But where you go when you go outside and when you're standing in the sun and it's not really warm enough to stand with a t-shirt and in shorts, and you can't feel the sun on your skin, and you certainly have no risk of burning if you stood outside all day, that's really when the sun's not strong enough to produce adequate vitamin D in your skin. So you can gauge that for yourself. If it's one of those days where you go out and you could wear a t-shirt and you thought if you stayed out all day you would burn, that's probably, the sun is probably strong enough to produce adequate vitamin D, so you wouldn't need a supplement at those times. Taking a supplement is very important. Now, some research is starting to show that we can actually get preformed 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D in our foods. There is some evidence that some foods contain preformed 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D. And that's very interesting, because if you actually consume 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D in your food, you don't need so much of the compound. The problem is that so little research has been done in this area, we don't really know how much preformed 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D is in the foods. We've measured the vitamin D in foods as vitamin D, as the parent compound. We've not measured it really as this 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D. And this again, I've gone on about this before, but this is one of the examples of the misallocation of money in science. The money tends to go towards large projects, putting things in space, trying to collide particles in these hugely expensive particle colliders. Sometimes the little questions that would actually help people, the easy to answer questions about how much of something is in a particular food, are completely overlooked. And this is one of the problems with modern science: the misallocation of funding. The things that would really help people, that are actually quite cheap to do and could be done relatively easy, they're not performed. But these big expensive projects that really, at the end of the day, don't really produce anything of any gain for anybody. That's where the funding tends to go, and obviously nutrition is not very heavily funded compared with some of these other areas. So when I say we haven't looked at the amount of 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D in foods, it seems incredulous to some people that why don't they look? But if you don't give the researchers money, if you don't give them the time to be able to research this, they simply won't get it. These papers won't be published. So it'll trickle out, I'm sure, over the next few years. People will start to look at this as they start to build up a picture of vitamin D. But this story, what I'm saying is, this story is not over. At the moment, we know that there's not enough actual preformed vitamin D in foods to be able to maintain our plasma levels, but there may be foods that contain 2,5-hydroxy vitamin D, and therefore we may need consuming those foods may actually be able to allow us to use foods to maintain our vitamin D levels, but it's not exactly clear because we haven't looked. So really, as a recap, during the summer you don't need vitamin D as a supplement. You don't need to worry about vitamin D. If you're healthy, your body will produce all the vitamin D you require. But during the winter, you need to maintain your plasma levels of your 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D above about 40 nanograms per mil, which is 100 millimoles per litre. To do that's very difficult from food, so you will need dietary supplements, of which you should take really the vitamin D3 form. And you will need about 2,000 IU. If you're larger, if you have if you're heavier than 75 kilograms, you may require more vitamin D. You have to understand as well that you cannot get a toxicity from creating vitamin D from your skin, but you can get a toxicity from taking a supplement. Now, this is why I recommend not taking vitamin D all throughout the year. I recommend getting your vitamin D in the summer when you can, from production from the skin, and then only relying over the winter months taking a supplement, because that vastly decreases the risk of you getting any toxicity of vitamin D, because the 6 months of taking vitamin D is very unlikely to cause, unless you took a very, very high amount, it's very unlikely to cause any kind of toxicity. When you get through to spring, you stop taking your supplements, and then your body's got an automatic cutoff where it will stop producing vitamin D when it has enough, and therefore you can't overproduce it from your skin. If you're unable to get in the sun, for example, if you were elderly and you're in an institution and you were given vitamin D supplements and you had to take them all year round, you would need to be more careful about a toxicity, because it would be quite insidious. It would build up over time. Taking 2,000 IU over a long period of time, though, has been looked at in studies, and it does appear to be quite safe. Many studies have gone actually a lot higher than that. And many studies have given upwards of 50,000 IU, not over the long term, but certainly over a number of months, 6 months, and the toxicity is quite minimal at those kind of concentrations. So over the 6 months, if you're taking 2,000 IU, there shouldn't be any problem at all with toxicity. It's really when you take much higher concentrations for much longer periods, and like I say, if you're coming off the vitamin D in the spring anyway to get your vitamin D production through natural means, through the sun, the toxicity problem is not going to be there. So that was a really quick video to go over vitamin D. Don't forget to take your supplements. You need to start thinking about that, particularly if you're in the United Kingdom. You need to start thinking about taking your supplements about now. You need to take them all the way through the winter, all the way through the spring. And really when the summer, hopefully it won't feel like it's been too long, but hopefully next spring when the sun starts to get a bit stronger, then you can think about coming off your supplements and getting your vitamin D from the sun. So I hope that was interesting, and I hope that was a useful reminder for those people that are already convinced and already taking their vitamin D supplements. If you've got any comments on this video, please leave them in the comments box, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. And remember to eat well, stay healthy, protect yourself, and I'll see you soon for another video.